January 30th, 1925. In the U.S. state of Kentucky lies a cave known as Sand Cave. Holding a kerosene lantern in one hand, Floyd Collins began to enter the cave through an opening barely 5 feet high. The cave was extremely small. Consequently, he had to proceed by crawling on his hands and knees. Sharp, jagged rocks jutted out from every surface of the cave walls. The interior was pitch black, a suffocating darkness, and his kerosene lantern was his only source of light and comfort. Eventually, he reached an area known as the Turnaround Room. It was a place so daunting that even seasoned cavers, upon reaching it, would often turn back in fear. This is precisely why the spot was named the Turnaround Room, because to venture any further, a caver would have to navigate through an incredibly narrow passage. This passage was so constricted that even a small child would struggle immensely to squeeze through it. To give you a better idea of its dimensions, the opening was roughly the size of a 500-milliliter Coca-Cola bottle. To reach this point meant finding oneself trapped in a situation exactly like this. Floyd slowly began to disappear into this narrow aperture. His clothes kept snagging on the cave's sharp, jagged rocks, making his forward progress an arduous struggle. Using his legs, Floyd pushed himself inch by inch deeper into the cave. Eventually, he reached a wider opening. To proceed further inward, he had to descend 10 feet into a narrow fissure below. This, too, was a constricted passage, much like a chimney flue. He secured a rope to a rock and lowered himself down into the fissure. This marked the natural end of the cave system. Therefore, in order to access the area beyond, he began to dig. In fact, just on the other side lay a magnificent crystal chamber, a sight that looked something like this. Floyd had been working, digging and excavating at this very spot for nearly a month. As on every other day, Floyd finished his work and began his journey back out. Retracing his steps through the same narrow route, he once again found himself struggling just as he had on the way in. However, after traversing a short distance, Floyd's kerosene lantern broke. He was now left completely alone within the pitch-black confines of the cave. Despite the darkness, he continued to make slow but steady progress toward the exit. But then, suddenly, and by a tragic misstep in the darkness, he accidentally struck a loose rock with his foot. Suddenly, a heavy stone weighing 20 kilograms tumbled down from above and landed squarely on his ankle. He struggled desperately to dislodge the rock using his other foot. However, due to the confined space, the stone became wedged immovably between the cave wall and his leg. The more he kicked at the rock, the more small stones broke loose and rained down upon his leg. Floyd was trapped in an agonizingly contorted position, one in which he could not even sit upright. With every movement he made, pebbles and debris cascaded down from above, landing near his feet and further compounding the peril of his situation. The jagged, uneven rocks beneath him dug painfully into his back, while drops of icy water dripped from the ceiling onto his face. And slowly, inexorably, the crushing pressure of the rock on his leg began to intensify. Now, in this dire predicament, he had only one recourse: to scream for help. This was Sand Cave, and Floyd Collins was trapped 60 feet beneath the surface inside a small, pitch-black cavern. Thus began Floyd Collins' desperate struggle for survival. Floyd Collins was born on January 20th, 1887, in Logan, Kentucky, USA, a region renowned for its vast networks of caves. From a young age, he possessed a deep passion for cave exploration. He would spend hours every day exploring the subterranean depths, sometimes even falling asleep inside the caves. In Floyd's era, cave exploration in that region was a lucrative and highly competitive enterprise. In 1925, Floyd discovered a cave he named Sand Cave, situated just a few meters off the main highway. This particular cave held a fascinating secret. Deep within its interior lay a chamber composed entirely of gypsum crystals. It was a cave of extraordinary beauty, far surpassing any other in the region. However, gaining access to it was an arduous task. For several weeks, Floyd had labored tirelessly to clear the narrow passageway of pebbles, sandstone, and limestone debris. Finally, on January 30th, 1925, the very day he became trapped inside, he succeeded in excavating a path leading into the crystal chamber. He was ecstatic. After a month of grueling effort, his dream had finally come true. Yet fate, or perhaps a higher power, had written a very different destiny for him that day. Well, on his way back that day, Floyd became trapped 60 feet underground, a place where even the slightest movement was impossible. For hours on end, Floyd kept shouting, but there was no one there to hear him. Exhausted, he eventually fell asleep right there, and upon waking, he began shouting once again, but there was no one there to hear his cries. He had been trapped inside a small cave for nearly 23 hours. Meanwhile, growing anxious when Floyd failed to return home, his family members, including his father, uncle, and younger brother Homer Collins, arrived at the cave entrance to search for him. They noticed Floyd's shirt and hat wedged near the cave's opening. Seeing this, they realized that Floyd was likely somewhere inside the cave. To confirm this, his brother, Homer Collins, ventured to the cave's turnaround section and began calling out his name. From deep within, he heard his brother's answering cries. There was no longer any doubt in Homer's mind. His brother was in grave danger. Homer climbed back out and informed everyone of Floyd's predicament. Subsequently, armed with some food and water and taking immense risks, he struggled his way back inside to reach his brother's head. His first priority was to help his brother relax, so he fed him a sandwich and some hot coffee. He then began formulating a plan to extricate him from the spot. However, the conditions inside were extremely perilous. Merely surviving there for a single minute felt like an arduous challenge for Homer. Floyd lay trapped with a heavy boulder pinning down his legs, surrounded on all sides by smaller stones. Perched atop these smaller stones were numerous loose rocks, poised to tumble down at any moment. Given the extremely narrow opening, Homer was left with only two viable options. The first option required Homer to lower himself feet first into the cavity. However, doing so would make it impossible for him to physically reach or touch Floyd, as his own body would completely block the access. The second option involved lowering himself head first into the space. This would grant him the necessary access, but it would require him to work upside down to dislodge a boulder weighing nearly 100 kilograms. The critical issue, however, was the severe lack of space. He labored for nearly 8 hours attempting to clear the rocks. Yet, loose stones from above kept cascading down and piling up, rendering all of Homer's strenuous efforts futile. He told his brother, "I'm going out to arrange for some proper rescue equipment," and, with a heavy heart, he climbed back out of the cave. By this time, Floyd had been trapped inside for nearly 45 hours. Upon emerging from the cave, Homer was met by a crowd of several thousand people gathered outside, all waiting in hopeful anticipation that Homer had succeeded in rescuing his brother. By now, news of Floyd's accident had spread everywhere like wildfire. Consequently, a large number of reporters descended upon the scene. They all began clamoring to interview Homer, incessantly pestering him with questions about Floyd. Among them was a reporter named William Miller, who made persistent attempts to secure an interview with Homer. However, an exasperated Homer snapped at him, saying, "Listen, instead of asking me such stupid questions, why don't you go inside the cave yourself and ask Floyd?" Taking this to heart, William Miller agreed to the challenge. Armed with his camera, he ventured into the cave. Moving cautiously, he eventually reached Floyd's location. In reality, he had not come there to offer Floyd any assistance. His sole objective was to boost his news broadcast's TRP ratings. Under such dire circumstances, with Floyd literally fighting for his life, Miller proceeded to interview him, a spectacle that was truly absurd. Yet Floyd was in no condition to give an interview. He was, at that very moment, locked in a desperate struggle against death. Eventually, reporter Miller emerged from the cave. Upon returning to the surface, Miller published a detailed blow-by-blow account of Floyd's plight in the newspapers. His story quickly swept across the entire United States. People from far and wide began arriving by train, gathering in massive crowds outside the cave entrance as they waited anxiously for Floyd's rescue. Seizing upon this opportunity, various entrepreneurs began setting up shop. Lines of street food stalls sprang up everywhere, and nearby hotels quickly ran out of food and vacancies while room rates skyrocketed. Meanwhile, street magicians began performing tricks to earn money from the crowds. In short, the entire area had transformed into a bustling carnival ground. However, the sheer pressure exerted by the massive crowds above caused the rocks within the cave below to become even more unstable. At this critical juncture, a firefighter named Robert arrived on the scene. He devised a plan to rescue Floyd by securing a rope around him and pulling him out from the surface. He then ventured inside the cave and fastened a rope around Floyd's chest. On the outside, the crowd, working in unison, began pulling on the rope. However, the plan ended in failure. Due to the tension on the rope combined with the movement of the crowd above, the opposite wall of the cave collapsed. The single narrow passage, the only route through which it had been possible to reach Floyd, was now permanently blocked. Only one option remained: to excavate a 60-foot shaft directly down to Floyd's location and pull him out. Yet, undertaking such a task was no easy feat, for digging such a deep shaft would require a considerable amount of time. Moreover, it was impossible to say with any certainty whether Floyd would survive for that long. After conducting numerous calculations, the rescue team commenced mining operations. However, just as they were mining, it began to rain. Consequently, the mining process faced even greater difficulties. As a result, mining operations were temporarily halted for a considerable period. Once the rain ceased, the mining work resumed. After nearly 30 hours of mining, they finally located Floyd Collings's body. Regrettably, however, there was no sign of life, meaning Floyd Collings was no longer alive. After a struggle for survival spanning nearly 17 days, Floyd's race for life came to an end right there. Subsequently, the rescue team recovered Floyd's body, and he was laid to rest right there in front of the cave.